2024, 9 p.m. East African time. Thank you for joining us. What an unprecedented day it is in the Republic of Kenya. Since 1982, the KDF soldiers have taken to the streets to help the police in quelling the anti-finance bill protests across the country. So that will be the basis of our conversation tonight. I'm joined in studio by Emmanuel Otieno, who's an advocate of the High Court. Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for your time this evening. Right, you're welcome. What a ruling by the High Court Justice, that is Lawrence Mugambi, tonight over, okaying the military on the streets. Quick reactions, perhaps, over that ruling.
Well, indeed, the High Court Justice Lawrence Mugambi has upheld the decision that effectively deploys the military officers to assist the members of the National Police Service to attend to the current situation that is ongoing, which is the street protest.
Yes.
And personally, I find it very confusing, and in my view, it is a dangerous precedent.
Dangerous precedent. Well, you'll be telling us more about that, as well as why confusing that ruling is. But before we get into that conversation, we've got a bit of stories that we'd love us to take a look at tonight. So let's take a look at the highlights. KDF deployed to the streets to assist police as security forces contain protesters in various towns. 3 people dead in Mombasa, dozens injured across the country. Protesters' lives lost on the streets. List of abductions grows longer as Joshua Okayo and Wangila Wabomba's whereabouts unknown. All right, my name is Cynthia Nanjala. Your feedback is highly welcomed across our social media platforms on EBN TV, where we are live. So let's get started. Now we'll kick it off with that unprecedented ruling where the High Court has upheld the decision taken by the Cabinet Secretary for Defense, Aden Duale, to deploy military officers to quell protest chaos. Justice Lawrence Mugambi said the continuation of the military in assisting the police is necessary given the need to preserve peace and public safety and protect critical infrastructure. The judge subsequently directed that duration and areas of engagement be gazetted within the next 2 days to alleviate the public fear that their liberties might be put in jeopardy. The court at the same time said the file shall remain open to receive and deal with any complaints on violation as long as the duration of military lies. Well, that is a conversation we'll be having much deeper engagement on in just a bit, because that ruling has just been released tonight, or just this evening, by Justice Lawrence Mugambi. Now, a mixture of friendliness and hostility dominated anti-finance bill protests in various parts of the country on Thursday as Kenyans continued to show their dissent against the impunged bill. A number of Kenyans defied the voice of reason and still demonstrated across the country, despite President William Ruto having Wednesday declined to sign the contentious bill into law. But come Wednesday, protesters started assembling in major urban towns, including Nairobi, Mombasa, and Eldoret, which have in the previous protests witnessed massive turnout. Kisumu also witnessed protests which were largely peaceful, as demonstrators even took to having a conversation with security personnel deployed to quell any violence act.
So for the president and for me, I am buying into the first speech he made, because that's what he truly is. And that's the perfect picture of who he is. Because how do you stand and call peaceful protesters your people, citizens you signed up to protect, to lead? We gave you that power, man, and then you stand up and call people criminals, and then you want to say people are treasoners. What do you mean? What do you mean? We put you there and we can take you down.
We have said that we are done with the finance bill. It cannot be taken back to Parliament. We have already lost faith in Parliament. We already gave a no confidence vote on Parliament. It is the same people who brought us here. It can't be that it is the same people who can solve the mess that we are already in. We have lost faith in Parliament. We have lost faith in President Ruto. He can't tell us that he's now withdrawing and apologizing, and people have been killed. People have been maimed. We have families who are now distraught. Their livelihoods have been destroyed. Their lives have been destroyed. Infrastructure has been destroyed. You can't tell us now, and it is when you now want to solve it. We have lost faith in you, and we are saying we are done with the finance bill. Now we want Ruto to go. Please, President Ruto, if you love this country, if you believe in God, the God that you have been preaching to us, then listen to what God is saying. And he is saying that Kenya is bigger than you. Don't stay there and people will die, because we will not stop until you step down.
And you see, the crazy thing is, what I'm afraid to reject finance bill. We've won, yes, the first one, but the next thing is Ruto must go, because with or without the finance bill, this government, to set this country right, it needs an entire overhaul on that leadership. And we're not just doing Ruto alone. We are going to take Ruto down, take all those MPs who said yes, because you are misusing the power we the people get.
Now, the Kenya Defence Forces personnel were seen patrolling city streets on Thursday, hours before the High Court delivered a ruling on whether to suspend the deployment of the military as part of reinforcement plans to neutralize chaotic scenes during the anti-finance bill demonstrations. The KDF personnel could be seen snaking through protesters, but they stayed short of engaging them. The deployment of the military to quell protests has been deemed unconstitutional by a section of leaders and Kenyans. However, police, on the other hand, lobbed tear gas of pockets of protesters around the city as they attempted to access the central business district.
Ilienda na live ingine sina hata.
Police in Mombasa engaged protesters in running battles, lobbing tear gas canisters to disperse crowds that had converged in various locations within Mombasa Central Business District. This is civil society group Muslims for Human Rights Muhuri in Mombasa say that 3 people have been confirmed dead, with more than 50 other protesters nursing serious injuries at the Coast General Teaching and Referral Hospital following the ongoing Anti-Finance Bill 2024 demonstrations.
Tunaona kuwa polisi wametumia nguvu nyingi sana kuumiza vijana, na ninapoongea na umma ni kuonyesha kuwa polisi ni kamba wamelemewa na maandamano haya. Jana tumekuwa mochari na tumeona vijana wawili wamekufa, vijana wadogo sana kama miaka 18 19 hivi, wamepigwa risasi. Tumeangalia mmoja mpigwa risasi ya kichwa, mwingine mpigwa risasi ya mgongo, na wako pale Coast General, waliletwa kama unknown. Na vile vile kuna mmoja pia alikufa akipigwa matia gas mingi sana kijana, yeye naye sasa yuko Pandia. Kwa hivyo Mombasa tuna confirm kama watetezi wa haki za kibinadamu ni watu 3 wameuliwa na polisi.
Corruption in Kenya is eating this country.
Correct.
The issue number 2 is unemployment. If you see the magnitude of people, if you see the demography of our young people coming out to fight for their rights, please don't even kill them. You're talking about you have only killed 6 people, when we know very well ya kwamba wale ambao wameaga dunia hadi kufikia sasa ni watu zaidi ya 30. Kwa sababu watu wamekufa, watu wameaga jijini Nairobi, watu wameaga hapa Mombasa, watu wameaga Nakuru, hata Kakamega.
Sasa kwamba this and Kenya demonstrate peaceably. Wakitoka hapa wakienda hiyo barabara mpaka State House, there should be no violence. The police must respect the rights of the Mombasa people and Kenya at all. We want to tell Ruto that he should stop lying to Kenyans. He as the president has no powers to withdraw a bill. We only needed 2 terms from the president. 1, I reject the bill. Number 2, I assent the bill.
Governor James Orengo has torn into the decision by President William Ruto to withdraw the Finance Bill 2024, citing the Constitution does not allow for withdrawal by head of state, but only referral. Senior Counsel Orengo at the same time called for the resignation of President William Ruto from office following the uproar and subsequent rejection of the bill. President Ruto on Tuesday declined to sign the finance bill into law and has called for its withdrawal, saying he has listened to the view of Kenyans, and the president pointed out that he would go by the wishes of the people.
The president cannot withdraw. The constitution does not give him powers to withdraw. I know he can refer to Parliament, to the National Assembly, or to the Senate, whichever the House is relevant for purposes of that bill. But even the House has to undertake a vote. Already their functions official, they had already dealt with the matter. It's the House which passed the entire bill. And also that bill went to the National Assembly after it had been approved by the president, the same president who is now referring it back to the National Assembly. So what happens now is that, the National Assembly can still say, no, we don't agree with the president. Or if the National Assembly does not meet or does not sit like it's not sitting now, the finance bill can still become an act, because under the law and by the operation of the Constitution, the expiry of 14 days after the assent or the refusal to assent will automatically bring about the publication or the constructive publication of the bill, and then it becomes law. So it's a plain words. It's a plain words. This was his own document.
Now, the Kenya School of Law Student Governing Council has this Thursday released a press statement on the disappearance of the president of the Law Students Association, Joshua Okayo, following his vocal stance against the Finance Bill 2024. The trainee advocates have decried the blatant disregard of Kenyan citizens' rights, demanding that the government respects constitutional rights and freedoms. The Kenya School of Law Student Governing Council have said the abductions are a direct threat to freedom and democracy Kenyans fought for and wish to enjoy.
Joshua was abducted in Rongai in the safety of his home, and we wish to communicate that we want Joshua released. As of yesterday afternoon, we've been through all the police stations in the area. We've been to Ongata Rongai Police Station, Gataka Police Station, and Karen Police Station. And at all these doors, we were met and told that he is not here. We further received communication that he's being held at the Anti-Terror Police Unit at Upper Hill, and hurriedly we made our way to that particular place. And again, we were met with the same response that Joshua is not there. Furthermore, our sources also revealed to us that Joshua is being moved around along with other people who are abducted from the confines of our homes. Dear Kenyans, at this particular time, this is not something that we want relieved. We have been through this before, and long gone are the days where one should sleep in fear that these people can come and abduct you from the safety of your homes.
Free Joshua Okayo.
Okay, my name's Nyamunga Frederick, brother to Joshua Okayo, who is missing. Okay, as a family, we are also distressed by this information, and we are just calling upon those who are holding him to just release Joshua, because as a family we are in pain. We haven't known his whereabouts up to this moment.
We urge all learned friends, human rights organizations, and the general public to join us in raising awareness about the many disappearances of young boys and girls across the country. We are advocating for the release of those who have been abducted across the country and urge all government officers, including the police, not to be misused in perpetuating these illegal and unlawful actions. As the Kenya School of Law Students Body, we decry the blatant disregard of Kenyan citizens' rights and are committed to play our part in demanding for an end to these injustices. These are not the days that Kenyans will go to the streets and beg and plead to have their rights respected by the ruling class. We demand that the government respects our constitutional rights and freedoms. We courageously stand united in demanding for Joshua Okayo and others' immediate release.
Now, young people in Bungoma County have come out to demand the government to release Wangila Wabomba, who is an aide to the Bumula Member of Parliament Wanami Wamboka, who disappeared on Tuesday. Speaking in Bungoma, the young people are questioning that Wabomba was last seen at a demonstration in Nairobi. Now, they've given a deadline for 1 day to the government to ensure Wabomba is found safe and returned to his family, where he is the sole provider.
We have lost our son, Wangila Wabomba, who was last seen in demonstrations on Tuesday at 11:39 a.m. Kindly, Mr. President, like you said yesterday in your national address, you said that you are not going to entertain extrajudicial killing in your government. Yes. And therefore,
na Wangila Wabomba hakukuwa bungeni akapiga yes ama akapiga no. Yeye ni kijana ambaye aliingia streets ku exercise his democratic right, na hii mambo ya picketing na kuandamana iko katika sheria yetu. Kwa hivyo tunashangaa inakuaje yeye hakuwa na panga, yeye hakuwa na bunduki, inakuaje yeye sahi amewekwa mahali hatujui na familia yake huku nyumbani wako wanalia.
Yes. Wametafuta kila mahali, police stations, hospitali, ndugu yetu hayuko. Sisi kama watu wa Bungoma tunaambia serikali ya kwamba mutoe kijana yetu Wangila Wabomba akuje tukoe. Sisi hatusikii vizuri tukiangalia mambo ambayo inafanyika katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. Kama vijana wa Bungoma
ambao tunaomba serikali yote mahali penye iko uachilie kijana yetu. Tunasikia hivi karibuni walikuwa wameshika tamapie karibu wapunge wawili, mmoja akiwemo pia mheshimiwa pia Wandai, lakini tunapata ripoti aliachiliwa jana. Sasa tunaomba pia serikali muachilie Wangila Wabomba, pia mheshimiwa Chaka Wanami Wamboka, pia aruti salama salamini wakati alikuwa kule Nairobi, aruti vile alikuwa msima. Hatutaki serikali mahali penye mmefikisha tuendelee kukua na mna hivyo.
Sikiza sauti ya mwananchi. Wachana na maneno ya kushika watu kiholela holela ukiwaweka Nyayo House jinsi Moi alikuwa anaweka watu Nyayo House.
Mtu. So tafadhali penye hiyo kijana yuko, naomba serikali muachilie siku ya leo. Akuje aungane na familia yake.
Jana wamesimama tu kwa barabara wanataka kujua huyu Wangila ako wapi. Tunataka mtoto wetu, tunataka kijana yetu akikuwa hai, akipumua na akikuwa kwa afya vile alikuwa nayo. Na sisi kama wakaaji wa Kabula, haswa wodi yangu, sisi mbunge alituuliza twende tupige no ama yes. Sisi ndio tulimwambia enda useme no, na amesema kwa niaba ya watu wa Kabula na Bumula.
Nyaribari Masaba, Member of Parliament Daniel Manduku advised President William Ruto to dissolve Parliament and call for fresh elections within 90 days following the chaos witnessed in Parliament during the anti-finance bill demonstrations. Addressing the press in Kisii on Thursday, Manduku accused elected leaders of failing the country's mandate. He stated that new elections would give Kenyans the opportunity to choose new leaders who would serve them faithfully.
I want to state here that as elected leaders, we are the problem. And I want to ask the President to immediately dissolve the National Assembly and call for elections within 90 days. I know people will argue that there is no IEBC, but remember, we are party to many international treaties. We can ask the AU, that is African Union, the East African Community, or the UN to send 9 commissioners to oversee the elections. The first point will be to update the voter register within 30 days and thereafter conduct fresh elections. Members of Parliament who served barely 2 years can be compensated on their remaining term.
All right, at that point, allow us to take a quick breather, but we come back with that conversation tonight. The High Court Justice Lawrence Mugambi has okayed the deployment of KDF forces on the streets to what he says should assist the police. But is that the same feeling that is amongst Kenyans and legal minds? And we'll be having that conversation with Emmanuel Otieno, who's the advocate of the High Court of Kenya. So send in your feedback across our social media platforms, thoughts, questions, comments that you may have concerning this unprecedented ruling that now brings us to a point where we're having the military on the streets to quell protests for the first time since 1982. What does this mean for the country? How does that now shape any protests that may happen in future? We'll return shortly with that conversation. Stay with us.
Are you looking to host an unforgettable event that will leave a lasting impression on your guests? Well, look no further than Iconic Events, the premier event planning company in the region. We are an audio-visual equipment hiring company that has handled some of the biggest events in the country. We provide a reliable, comprehensive range of event solutions such as corporate events, crusade, weddings, worship experience, rurashios, etc. Our expertise centers on the provision of high-performance PA systems, quality backlight, stage lighting, high-resolution LEDs and projection screens, DJ equipment, live recording services, and sound installation. We offer a range of options to suit different needs and budgets. Talk to us and let us turn your dream event into a reality. Contact us today at 0711 238 353 or 0706 501 701 or 0731 706 003. You can also visit us at Buruburu Phase 4, Rare Court. Iconic Events, we got you covered.
All right, welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. How about we now kick it off? Emmanuel Otieno is here with me in studio, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Thank you, Emmanuel, once again for your time this evening. When we began, you said this judgment is very confusing, and that will be the case for many because the judge that is Justice Lawrence Mugambi made sound observations. As you know, he gave a brief description, but at the end of the day, he made such an inconsistent ruling with some of the observations that he's made. Does that now explain why it is confusing for you?
It does.
Yeah.
And in his ruling, one of the things he acknowledges is that the National Police Service and the Kenya Defence Forces have distinct roles. All of them are required to have certain specific roles within the security of the country, managing the security of the country.
Yes.
But one is charged with maintaining law and order, which is the National Police Service. But for the Kenya Defence Forces, they are ordinarily charged with the responsibility of protecting the territorial sovereignty of the Republic.
Right.
And therefore, ordinarily, they do not have the training to handle internal security issues. Their training is usually more of military combat,
right.
Which is also accompanied by the use of heavy firearm and such kind of resources, which is very now worrying.
Right, but one of the biggest, I'd say, arguments that lawyers from the government side made was that police looked to have been defeated by protesters or overpowered, for lack of a better word, that now led protesters to be able to get into a building, an institution such as Parliament. Is that valid?
That concern appears to be valid, but remember the Kenya Defence Forces is only supposed to come to assist. And when you look at the whole situation, and you have to begin to wonder whether the National Police Service has really been overwhelmed to the extent that they are unable to maintain law and order. In my view, I think that is not the case. Remember, just recently, Kenya has deployed police officers to go to Haiti,
yes,
which is a foreign country. And it begs the question, do we have capacity? Do we have enough resources here in the country to manage our own affairs in the first place? Is this an admission by the government that indeed we do not have enough police officers to handle our own affairs, even though we have actually sent some to Haiti?
Right. And you raise up an important point, because the police officers that left Haiti, in fact, the court ruled on it and said it was unconstitutional because the national police, or at least the police, cannot go beyond Kenya's borders to maintain, security in another country. But we seem to be switching roles here. Police out the country to Haiti. KDF, who are supposed to maintain territorial security within the streets now, you'd assume the National Security Council, which is chaired by President William Ruto, has got the KDF general, has got the Cabinet Secretary for Defense, will be able to make a decision that legally goes with what the Constitution requires.
Well, I would say that the recent actions that have been happening within, and decisions that have been made with respect to the administration of this country lately must worry all of us, because it appears that there has been a consistent attempt to mutilate the Constitution and our laws. For instance, what we are talking about right now, which is the police deployment.
Yes.
I know, and I cannot, obviously the court has already made a decision or ruled on that, and therefore I may not go into details about the arguments for and against, but it worries all of us, because we have a constitutional right in this country to demonstrate, provided that those demonstrations are being, that right to demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions to public institutions are actually exercised within the limits of the Constitution. And in my view, other than a few of the incidences that we have had, the demonstrations have largely been peaceful. The law requires the Cabinet Secretary for Defense to actually inform Parliament about, first of all, the need. Why is it necessary to deploy the Kenya Defence Forces to go and assist the National Police Service? Why has it become necessary? Secondly, the Cabinet Secretary is actually supposed to give details as to when are we, the period. Are we going to have this forever? Are we going to have it for the next 1 year? Are we going to have it for the next 2 weeks? And which places are we actually going to see this?
Right.
So that particularity is missing in the Gazette notice that has actually now been upheld by the court, and you've seen the court now going backwards and saying that now you can regularize the Gazette notice, even though it appears that it does not meet the constitutional standards.
Right, but the CS has been given 2 days, to give the duration, to give us scope, terms of engagement, as well as areas of intervention, and so they're supposed to do that within 2 days. There has been question about how we got to this point, that process, and as you've rightly put it, essentially the CS is supposed to, have that as a motion in Parliament, which is forwarded or tabled by the majority leader, and then they can okay it. Shouldn't that have been a factor for Justice Lawrence Mugambi to consider before making this sort of ruling?
Absolutely, and actually the process that was actually followed in okaying this move by Parliament, by approving this decision by the Defense Council is actually what is worrying. It's not just the decision, but the process. The process, the end product is as good as the process itself. And when the Constitution requires that the Parliament be informed, actually Parliament does not just pass decisions or policy. They just don't do it. What should have happened actually is that there should have been a debate in Parliament on that particular issue. There should be the issue that I've just mentioned that should have been outlined by the Cabinet Secretary, should have been brought to the attention of Parliament, before Parliament, for debate. And unfortunately also, the media was not allowed. The media was not allowed. So that should tell you where we are headed to.
Is that a threat to the Constitution?
It is, because under Article 10 of our Constitution, we have the national principles of governance. And one of those is transparency. One of those is accountability. You have to account for your decisions. You have to account. And especially now that we are having so many cases of extrajudicial killings and abductions. I've heard you reading quite a number of stories of people actually who cannot be accounted for. And it surprised me when I heard the president distancing himself from all this and saying there has not been a single extrajudicial killing, which also was actually controverted by his own deputy from Mombasa, saying that the days of abduction and the days of extrajudicial killings are back to our countries, to our country. And does that mean that now we cannot dissent in our own country? That Kenyans cannot disagree with their own government? Kenyans cannot go on the streets and demonstrate peacefully and expect that the police will actually take care of their own security. So that is what is worrying. Remember, on the issue of abduction, the son to the Attorney General was actually one of those who was abducted. And you have to worry for the ordinary Kenyans in our country. And therefore, that question now should, when you try to connect it with the decision now to bring the KDF to the streets, it is worrying, because it sends a lot of fear. It sends a lot of fear, and I know that is probably where we are coming to. It brings a lot of fear for any Kenyan who might now want to exercise that democratic right. Are you going to will you really be going to the street when you know that the Kenya Defense Forces are on the street with that kind of machinery? Even though you know that you might be very peaceful, are you really going to the streets? And perhaps that is why you saw that the numbers today in the streets were quite were not as much as it was in the last few days.
And we'll get to that, just to speak about as well, how much now does this, affect or influence future protests that may arise. But I'll go back to two things that are in the Constitution, two scenarios where the Constitution allows for the deployment of KDF, and it says one in support of police in situations of emergency or disaster. And we saw that the justice was really very much highlighting what emergency or disaster is, and says they're not ones that have been defined in the Constitution, but he went with the definitions in the dictionary, as well as deployment to restore peace in any part of Kenya. Now the CS for Defense Head in Duale say in that particular notice said it was security emergency. Is there that security emergency, those two terms in the Constitution?
Actually, I took some time to peruse the application that was made, the petition that was filed by the Law Society of Kenya.
Yes.
And one of the issues that came up in that petition was actually that issue that you've mentioned. And it beats logic. It beats logic because in that Gazette notice, the Cabinet Secretary has specifically alluded to an emergency and disaster. That is the provision that he has invoked in that Gazette notice. And therefore you have to ask yourself, is there an emergency in our country right now, a security emergency? There has not been declared a state of emergency in our country as we speak, and therefore that argument does not hold any water.
Yeah.
The issue of disaster is something that we have seen before, like the issue of floods that we had the other day. You saw in Mahi Mahiu, when the flood swept quite a number of households, and the KDF had to be involved in assisting the families to, rescue operations and all that. So the managing disaster has been dealt with already. The issue of disaster is not really something that would require us to go deeply into it. It is floods, we are talking about fire, we are talking about buildings collapsing and such things. And therefore I do not think that under that provision that Gazette notice has been properly invoked.
Right.
However, I think the initial, I may preempt that the initial decision by the cabinet secretary would have actually been to invoke the provision that actually requires the KDF to be deployed when there is civil unrest in the country, and to just assist the police in calming down the civil unrest. And if that is the provision that the cabinet secretary would have relied on, then it would have made sense. It would probably have made sense, but it doesn't.
Right. Now, is there a need now for the KDF to protect life and property, or for them to protect the citizens themselves and their rights? Now, what will they be doing on the streets? Because these are people that are not armed with tear gas, are not armed with rungus for that matter. They're armed with guns, and just from how they're dressed basically tells the story. The equipment that we saw on the streets today, some of the guns that we're using, these are guns that they use in combats and in the army. So what will they be doing on the streets basically?
One of the things they will be doing is if I would translate it literally in Kiswahili, kuuza uoga in the streets, so that they prevent people from coming to the streets in the first place. I think that is probably what the government wants to do, because remember, the people to whom these KDF people have been deployed are actually just young people.
Yeah.
Most of them are very young. They probably are in campus or in the universities, or they are just concluding and they're just beginning to start their lives. Those people that we call Gen Z.
Yeah.
And therefore, having the KDF on the streets appears as though the government is actually is actually now ready to meet violence against its own people. And now we have to ask ourselves, is the government of the Republic of Kenya at war with its own citizens?
Right. Now, let's now get to this fear, because it has been seen on the streets already. How Tuesday was, and you compare it to today, there's a big contrast. Now, according to Justice Lawrence Mugambi, this is what he says. The presence of military in the streets can potentially muzzle civilian population from protesting to what it believes are unfair taxation policies imposed by government, and also put a wedge between military and the civil population. And the judge subsequently directed that duration, areas of engagement be gazetted, so that it alleviates public fear that their liberties might be put in jeopardy. And that begs the question now, if at all we come to a point yet again where citizens are not satisfied with whether policies or proposals, taxation, or even government policies or political policies for that matter that are put up in place by the government, there's that fear yet again that we might go to the streets, then we'll see a KDF deployment. How significant is this for future protests if they arise?
Well, in my view, just like I said, this ruling sets a very dangerous precedent for the government,
right,
and for those who have state machinery and willpower. And that is because all you need to do is communicate your intention or to demonstrate your intention to demonstrate, to exercise that right under the Constitution. And then the next thing that you are going to hear is that the KDF are on the streets. And therefore, this particular ruling is going to be used as a standard to actually make sure that the right to the right to demonstrate is not enjoyed by the Kenyans as it should be. And for me, that is a serious affront to our constitution, because Kenyans are supposed to be free. This is a free country. This is a democratic country. Otherwise, you are not going to have any difference between us and a country like Haiti.
Right. Now, Emmanuel, we've got 5 minutes to wrap it up. I'd love us to speak about now what the president did yesterday, that is on Wednesday, says he concedes and withdraws the Finance Bill 2024. Can a president withdraw a bill? And what does the Constitution say?
Well, I was actually very surprised when I heard that a bill that has actually been passed by Parliament can be withdrawn. For me, in the first place, this is a bill that has been passed by Parliament and was actually awaiting presidential assent.
Yeah, has gone through 3 stages.
It has gone through all the stages,
yes.
And it is now awaiting presidential assent. And at this point, it bothered me that the president is talking about withdrawal. The president, constitutionally, first of all, the president has no constitutional powers to withdraw any bill that has been passed by Parliament. In fact, he has no constitutional powers to withdraw any bill because he is not a member of Parliament. He is the president, and in our country we have the doctrine of separation of powers.
Yeah.
The president does not sit in Parliament, and therefore, because of that doctrine, he cannot engage directly into the affairs of Parliament. What he can do as a politician is probably to influence that decision through the leader of majority and his members of his party, to encourage them to reach out and to pass the bills that are going through Parliament. And so the president only has 2 options once a bill has been passed in Parliament. His first option is to assent to that bill. And once that bill is assented to, it becomes law.
Yeah.
The second option that he has, if he has any reservations as to why he cannot assent to a bill that has been duly passed by Parliament, is to refer that bill back to Parliament.
How does he do that now?
He does that through a memorandum in writing, stating his reasons as to why he cannot sign or assent to that bill. And then Parliament will now reconsider the bill again, taking into account the recommendations or the president's reservations. And having considered the president's reservations or recommendations, Parliament has 2 options in that case. One, to pass the bill a second time without amending anything in that bill, or to pass the bill with amendments as recommended by the president or his reservations. So they can actually pass that bill by 2/3 majority. And once that is done, the Speaker of the National Assembly will then resubmit the bill back to the President for assent. At that point, the President will have 7 days to assent to that bill, and then the bill will become law.
Right. There's been a lot of speculation over the time frame. Does this happen within 14 days, after 14 days, within 21 days, or after 21 days? Because there's a lot of speculation around the timelines, putting in mind that, currently Parliament is in recess. So what should be the time frame, considering that Parliament is in recess right now?
Well, Parliament can always be recalled.
For a special sitting?
Yes, the Speaker will just gazette a date, and the members of Parliament will be called back for that special sitting. However, once a bill has been passed, like the one that was passed the other day, you see it was submitted immediately to the president for assent.
Yes.
However, once the one that has been referred back to Parliament and then referred back to the president for assent should actually be assented to within 7 days. But it becomes law after 14 days after it has been passed. Yeah, and if it is passed by Parliament with or without amendments, it will not matter whether the president has actually assented to that bill or not. It will become law automatically after 14 days.
So if I got this straight, a bill which has, the president has had his reservation, has referred it back to Parliament, which subsequently refers it back to the head of state, can be assented within 7 days.
Yes.
Then if, it is assented within 7 days, then it becomes a law after 14 days.
Once it is passed by Parliament, the Speaker has 7 days to resubmit it back to the President. And then the President has 7 days to assent to it. So that makes a total of 14 days.
All right.
And at the expiry of those 14 days, it becomes law if the President does not refer it back to Parliament again.
All right. Quite the clarification right there. So Emmanuel, as we wrap it up, protests, at least there's no other notice of any protests that are coming anytime soon, either tomorrow or next week. But at this time, we've seen a lot of abductions that have happened, and unfortunately, even an advocate trainee, from the Kenya School of Law is one of the victims, and we've seen that that has happened across various persons and places. And the LSK president said, the Chief Justice actually, Martha Koome, said, persons that have been abducted need to be submitted in court as soon as possible. And there's fears that we are going back to an era which, our freedom fighters fought so hard to take us out of. As we wrap it up, is that where we are?
And that is exactly what the Deputy President acknowledged while he was making his address in Parliament. I think the other thing that we should be worried about as a country is, the presidency, there doesn't seem to be oneness in the way they operate right now. And that probably is another whole discussion that I may not want to go into. But the truth is, people have been abducted, people have been killed, and every life matters. Every person has a right to dignity. Every person has a right to life. No person should die on the street. If at all, the police who are actually on the street should actually be arresting people and taking them to court to take plea for whatever they should be charged with.
Right.
In the absence of that, if 24 hours have already expired and those people have not been brought to court, then what you can do is to make an application for habeas corpus so that they are produced in court. It has happened before, but again, the state can, where the state has decided to mutilate the constitution, they actually do it very well.
All right. So that is where we wrap it up tonight. Thank you very much, Emmanuel Otieno, an advocate of the High Court. Thank you for coming in and making clarifications about your confusions as well. And that is where we wrap it up tonight. Thank you for watching. This conversation continues not just on EBN TV, but also across the country, because important observations have been made, and we're living in an era where we're having, literate people who are voicing their concerns. So the conversation continues, and that is where we wrap it up tonight. My name is Cynthia Nanjala. Have yourself a fantastic evening. Good night.